fact, we were both attending a meeting of the cabinet till a few minutes ago. So, whilst you have food in front of you, I will share a few thoughts on the relationship, on the fact that this interactive session is taking place on 9/11. I think that, in fact, sets a particular context, and I'd be happy to share my personal thoughts on that. And after I run you through what is uppermost in my mind, I'd be very happy to take a few questions. I think the United States and India share a relationship which in many respects is sui generis. Why do I say that? It's very easy to refer to the commonality of value systems, to democracy, to shared interests, to a shared perception and, I think, commitment of what kind of a world we would like to see evolve. And I think some figures in that, the fact that the United States is a, $24 trillion economy? 28, good. May it go further and further up. That we are two democracies. The last elections which we held in India a few months ago, there were 980 million registered voters. And the number of people who actually turned out to vote was over 630 million. Now, I submit before you and this distinguished audience, my friends Ed Knight, Atul Kashyap, and all the very eminent invitees, this figure of 630 million people who turned out to vote, that figure is larger than a collation of the demography of most democracies in the world put together. Why is today's date important? And if you indulge me and I can go into a personal recollection, on that particular day, I was then assigned to the court of St. James. I was in London, but I was in Geneva attending a WTO dispute resolution panel which I was chairing. And suddenly, making allowance for the difference in time, suddenly you found the entire population which inhabited the Centre William Rappard on 154 Lausanne Avenue, everybody glued around TV screens. And you had the pictures of flying platforms hitting buildings. And since I'm an old-timer in Geneva, I served several tenures there. A lot of people came and asked me, they named my daughter, where is she? Because they knew she worked in the World Trade Center, one of the buildings which was struck by an aircraft. And I must say that in those few minutes when this question was asked and before I got information that she in fact had managed to take off our heels and run down several stories and reach the streets before the, when the first building was hit, it was known. But then people thought, well, this is all over until they saw planes coming in and then, they evacuated the buildings. So there was some of the most terrifying moments which any parent can have. But let me go back to what it means. We had been victims of terror, defined as someone else using terror as an instrument of state policy to undermine us. And I must say very honestly in the midst of this very distinguished gathering that when we talked about terrorism and we talked about being at the receiving end of it, not too many people understood fully well as to what that really meant. because that particular country was in a military relationship with some parts of the world, and people said it. But I think 9/11 was a defining moment which produced what I call a paradigmatic shift in understanding what the true nature and consequences of terrorism are. And I think following that, most countries, certainly all civilized countries, adopted a zero-tolerance norm. Professor Lal was very generous. He talked about my career. But in the context of a discussion on terrorism, I must tell you that the 2 years that I chaired I think it was the 1973 committee, the Counter-Terrorism Committee. When was the Counter-Terrorism Committee established by the UN? It was established in the immediate aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. And like most things in the US, I'm not being critical, but these are facts of life, they thought it was too important a committee to be presided over by anyone other than a representative of the Permanent Five. And you know the Permanent Five members of the Security Council. So when we assumed the membership of the Council in 2011, and one of the committees which we were invited to chair was the Counter-Terrorism Committee. And of course along with some sanctions committees and so on. And I can tell you that the cooperation that we had between the US delegation at that point of time and our own delegation, I go back to 2011, which is many years ago, but I've seen that cooperation increase. Some of those areas we don't necessarily talk about over working dinners, but there's an understanding that the threat that the world faces today may not be a threat that any one country, no matter how so ever strong in military terms or other terms, whether a single country can face that. I think there's a growing realization that you need to cooperate. Of course, your and my definition of what constitutes a terrorist may change, there's a difference of opinion amongst people. One man's terrorist is another guy's freedom fighter. But putting aside those historical and philosophical arguments, I think everybody is clear as to what is terrorism. When you use either any state uses or any non-state actor uses indiscriminate violence against innocent civilians who are non-participants in terms of combats or disputes, etc. Many years later, I was appointed by my government to be India's ambassador and permanent representative to the UN in Geneva, which also meant accreditation to the Human Rights Council. And I can remember a farcical discussion I had then with the representative on the council of a permanent member of the Security Council. She took me out for lunch when I was a newly arrived ambassador, and we started talking about terrorism. And she gave me a lesson in classical political thought. I'm not going to name the country because it will be unfair. She said that, in traditional political philosophy, it is the state which is all powerful. And it is the individual who he or she are helpless. And the state exercises that dominant power on people, and the people need the protection of human rights. So I said, wait a minute, I enjoy the discussion over lunch, and thank you for buying me the lunch. But tell me, do you describe Al-Qaeda as an individual? It's a non-state actor. This was the year of the Lord 2003, I think. I went there from London as ambassador to the UN in Geneva. And there were parts of the civilized world which still thought, even if you were Al-Qaeda, you were a non-state actor and you couldn't be. I said, look, the devastation these non-state actors are causing is far higher in terms of scale and consequences than what most states are capable of doing. And then, you know, the rest of the world changed. You had a change. Then, luckily, this kinds of farcical, ideas are no longer thrown back at us. I think in no matter which area you look at, I had the privilege of working on Indo-US relations as a civil servant when I was posted in the Ministry of External Affairs. I was Joint Secretary. It was many moons ago, but I've seen the relationship grow. Today, this is my 8th year as part of the Council of Ministers and as a cabinet minister. During the last 7 years, I was Minister for Housing and Urban Affairs for 7 years. I concurrently was in charge of civil aviation. I held independent charge there. I was with the Ministry of Commerce and Trade. And till recently, I was both Housing, Urban Affairs, and Petroleum and Natural Gas. I want to fast forward. No matter which portfolio I've had the privilege of dealing with, the US relationship has been extremely important. When we privatized Air India and gave it back to what I thought was their rightful owner, because it was a competitive bid, the House of Tatas got it back, that resulted in a boost to the Indian civil aviation sector. And what happened? The Indian airline sector was shown amidst global civil aviation, and our airlines ordered 1,000 planes. On that occasion, the Prime Minister got letters of appreciation from the President of the United States, the President of France, and other countries with Airbus as a consortium. The planes were bought roughly, 55 to 45%, or the other way around, I don't remember. The route between India and the United States, again, extremely important. One of my colleagues has given me speaking notes. I'm going to diverge from that. We can release those later if you like. But look at it this way. When it comes to technology, look at what Google is doing or what any of the other technology giants are doing. Not globally. They are global success stories. What they're doing in India. All right. If you go around India, I don't know how many of you are regular, frequent visitors, or how many of you come to the first time. India's on the move. We moved from being the 10th or 11th largest economy when Mr. Modi took over. We are the 5th largest economy, and if you believe in what the IMF says, in about 2.5 years' time, we'll be the 3rd largest economy. That's not very difficult to predict, because we are a $4 trillion economy now, growing at 7%, and I don't like to strike that tone, but some of the countries which we are competing against, who are in 4th and 3rd position, are for a variety of other reasons, either plateauing in growth or, they have concerns. But that's not the issue. Much of our growth story is, I think, also intimately linked with the United States. And I'm going to wind up after a few more comments by talking about the green energy transition. People have asked me, don't you feel a little self-conscious that you're described as the Minister of Petroleum and Natural Gas? So I said, well, that's the traditional nomenclature for the job. But I could, with equal ease, be described as the Minister for Energy Transition. Because what has Mr. Modi done? And by the way, I'm off to Washington another couple of days. I'm scheduled to meet Secretary Jennifer Granholm, and she was one of the first people I met when I got charge of this ministry 3 years ago. And one of the things she talked about at that point of time was 1 for 1 for 1, which is green hydrogen. That's the fuel of the future. I have no doubt on it. This morning we attended the 2nd edition of the India International Green Hydrogen Conference. And when we talk about the India Idea Summit, no matter which way you look at it, the transition that is being made on energy. Again, sometimes you have false narratives thrown at you. You know, there are the do-gooders. I was part of those do-gooders for a long span of my career, which means you get up one morning and say, now we have to go after this issue. You go do that. By the way, we need to make the energy transition. Stop everything on fossil fuels. So I keep reminding them, my friend, I have a good story to tell on green energy transition because we are making that transition. Today, we are in the happy situation that we have surpassed the United States in our biofuel blending. When Mr. Modi started, our biofuel blending program was only 1.4%. Today we are doing 15.9% last month. We had a target of 20% biofuel blending by 2030. We brought it forward by 5 years, and in the process, we are blending more than the United States. We have, thanks to our collaborations in 5G, I believe we are the second largest consumer. We are moving behind on all technical, and many with very strong US collaboration with US industry and the private sector. Let me also stay here right up front that there is no substitute to solid private sector growth, because economies will grow, different segments of the economy will contribute. I've seen my friend Ajay Khanna here. Yesterday they hosted a Social Entrepreneurs Award, and Klaus Schwab, who runs what's it called, World Economic Forum, it used to be called European Management Forum when I was a young diplomat, and I advised him that if you have to woo the capitalists of the world, don't confine yourself to the Europeans, go after the Americans and others as well. So now it's the World Economic Forum. But he says the idea of business is not business, but business to serve society. Now, when we go forward from here, what is the nature of societies that you want to see evolving? Well, you can have a discussion, and you guys have a fascinating election coming up in less than 2 months. And I think many people were around the TV screens today to see what result the debate produced. I know you can be a successful businessman on both sides of the political divide, so we won't go into that discussion. But I can tell you, that is the real celebration of democracy, no matter what happens. And the world today is looking to America for leadership. I don't want to go into that too late, partly because you're a $20 trillion plus economy. What you do in terms of global terms, I mean, if you want to listen to a traditional Indian song, I can tell you that all the multilateral institutions which were set up in the aftermath of the Second World War need to be revisited. And I'm not the only one who's going to tell you that, because the challenges that confront us today are vastly different from the challenges which the world faced when they met, your Secretary of Treasury was Mr. White at that point of time. At Bretton Woods, John Maynard Keynes was the British representative. I think two brilliant people drew up the architecture of what the post-war world would look like. But today, somebody will have to go back to the drawing board. And that drawing board, I'm not just talking about the architecture of the Security Council will be permanent members, but look at the countries which can do the heavy lifting. And the United States certainly, and I think the partnership of India with the United States, we draw strength from it, and I think the United States also needs to partner countries like India to face whatever challenges are coming up. And those challenges are sometimes to be confronted at the multilateral level, sometimes at the geopolitical level. And I think it's a very solid story of excellent collaboration in the past, which is not to say that we will not have arguments about what Atul can do better and what my friend Ed Knight can do better and what we on our side can do better. But that is the whole business of, economic decision-making. And I think as far as we are concerned, I think we've never taken the view that we know all the answers. Whether it is areas where we have gone forward, digital, financial inclusion, working out schemes for those segments of society which have traditionally been underprivileged. And I think the USIBF, through the India Ideas Summit and elsewhere, plays a very important role. So Atul, let me stop I've become a politician. You give me a mic and I can continue. But thank you very much. You guys have a great meeting, and I'm sure that the deliberations which you will have amongst your membership is also something that the governments on two sides will also greatly benefit from. Thank you very much.
Honorable Minister, it's such an honor on this day in particular that you would join us, and it's a symbol of the strength of the relationship between the two countries. But I want to note that in this room there's a lot of passion about that relationship, and it's driven in part